Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. It's wonderful to be here, and it's an honor to be a part of this series and in this church. There's quite a history in both. And I want to thank especially Alternatives and Writer Books, my UK publisher, for making my trip even possible. And Malcolm and Venetia, Susanna, all the volunteers, and Judith and Joe. And I'm very excited tonight to speak for the very first time from my new book, More Together Than Alone. And we'll talk about that quite a bit. And that book really explores the lineage of interdependence and care cross-culturally. And what I'll do tonight is, and I'll be happy to have some questions afterwards, but what I'd like to do tonight is I'll read some passages from the book, tell some stories, maybe read a poem. There'll be a mix of things, all as a way to explore the lineage and spirit of community and the lineage of how we work well together and some of the lessons from that. So the first lesson is, let's start with right where we are. I did a little research because I like to know where I am. And as many of you know, this church was originally put together and imagined by Sir Christopher Wren. And interestingly, back then, in a letter, he said that his way of thinking about churches is he felt that churches must be constructed so that, quote, all who are present can hear and see. Well, that's a good way to start to talk about community. That's a very good model. How do we construct our relationships so that everyone who's present can hear and see, and I would add, speak? So let's get started. Go right in. I'd like to start by reading a little bit from the introduction, which will give you a sense of and also let me say that I'm going to be giving you a glimpse of over 12 or 13 years of research. So I'm going to be casting a lot of seeds tonight. Don't try to track it all. If one or two touch you, it'll be a good evening. Okay? Just let it come in. So this is from the introduction. In the Hindu Upanishads, which are the anonymous holy texts in the Hindu tradition, there's a passage that speaks to how those who become wise lose their names in the great oneness, the way rivers lose their names when they flow into the sea. It's a wonderful image. In this transformation from the solitary to the communal, there's a mysterious physics that each generation has to relearn so we know what it is to work together. Time and again, we're asked to discover through love and suffering that we are at heart the same. How do we come to this knowledge in our lives, in our families, in our communities? What brings us together? What throws us apart? How do we inhabit what we have in common as well as verify what makes us unique? How does all of this help us deepen our practice of service and compassion? We are not the first to ask those questions. And as I've explored these questions, I've gathered stories and lessons across cultures and history. That's a big task. It's not definitive. It's just what I could possibly see myself. If you did it, you might find something else. And all to reveal moments of community and qualities of being in relationship that bring us together. And my effort and aim has been that despite the hardships that every generation has to experience, we are, in fact, more together than alone. So I offered these moments not as utopias or models, but more, here's another image, more as sunspots of human behavior that bear looking into, even though it may be hard to look into them. And these flashpoints of relationship and community, they arise from time to time to inspire us from moment to moment. And it's my hope that these authentic moments, and some moments might be between you and me now, and some might be long moments like the Iberian Peninsula from like 900 to 1150, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews not only lived together, but they flourished together. So that's a long moment of community. But all of these lessons, they're not meant to be cynical or idealistic, but simply resilient and useful. And all of this does matter. You know, the inner work and the outer work are connected. They've always been. All we have to do is listen to this quote from the Hindu sage Ramana Maharshi. He said, "To save the world before liberating yourself is like carpeting the earth rather than wearing sandals." To save the world before liberating yourself is like carpeting the earth rather than wearing sandals. So what happens in here and what happens between us is connected, inextricably connected. So ultimately, the work of community, I feel, is the practice of care stitching the world together. And we all know that ours is a complicated era, and we need every resource and example of heart and resilience we can find. It is both comforting and challenging to realize that no one can wrestle from the earth the song of how we can survive together, and no one voice can sing that chorus. In fact, we need each other more than ever. And series like this, gatherings like this, matter more than ever. Because if you imagine, as in a body, the body is made up of cells. And we understand a healthy body is anybody that has one more healthy cell than toxic cell. Now, we'd like more than that, but that's the bottom line. And if you imagine that humanity is one global body and every soul is a cell in that body, well, in addition to how we can legislate, protest, do things, take actions, every time we do authentic inner work, every time we meet like this, whether one-on-one or together, we are strengthening the immune system of humanity. We're making one more healthy cell than toxic cell. And I think that matters more than ever right now. So let me move on and talk about, because I want to mention or talk about the times we're living in, globally and especially in America. It's very maddening right now to be in America in a lot of ways. So let me start, I respond to this in two ways. One as a person in this time, in this moment, and then as a spirit that's trying to understand the larger patterns throughout history. And as a person in this time, I'm of Jewish heritage. I'm a student of all paths, but I'm culturally Jewish. My grandparents were part of the generation where I have family members who died in the Holocaust. So how am I to respond that I ever think that Nazis would walk in America, in the streets of America? What am I supposed to do with that? How do I deal with that? Other than to know that in some way, like everyone else, I have to every day ask, how can I be more visible? What can I do? So now as I back up, though, as a spirit and try to look at the history, there have always been in every generation places where we have come together and pushed each other away, just like waves in the ocean. Swell, crest, dip, swell, crest. So as I look back at that, how do we understand this? Well, I imagine that even in prehistoric times, we struggled with these tensions. So let's imagine, even back in cave times, imagine the first two people that ever discovered each other. Until that, they thought they were alone. Imagine one person comes to the mouth of a cave and sees the one in there, and they go, whoa, wait a minute, who are you? How'd this happen? And the one in the cave says, you're different, go away. And I think that that was the beginning of the go-away tribe. And the go-away tribe, depending on the level of fear, you're different, go away. And when we've had fear that's been great enough, we say, well, I can't trust you'll go away, so I'm going to put you where I can watch you. I'm going to put you in a detention camp, or a refugee camp, or a concentration camp, or a ghetto. And when the fear that drives the go-away tribe gets great enough, crazy enough, well, then we have periods of genocide. I can't even trust that you'll be where I put you. I have to make you go away. But now, as we go back, and the other person at the mouth of the cave says, oh, you're different. Come teach me. Thank God you're not like me. And now we have the beginning of the Come Teach Me tribe. And in the Come Teach Me tribe, when that has blossomed enough, we have periods of enlightenment and cross-cultural cooperation and the heights of civilization. So Plato, who was part of the Come Teach Me tribe, said we are born whole, but we need each other to be complete. We're more together than alone. Well, as I've reflected on this, the paradox, the catch, the challenge is that we belong to both tribes. We are they. There is no they. As maddening as it is for me to turn on the Trump TV every day, I have to, at the end of it, say, there is no they. We are they. Nobody did this to me. We've all done this together. And depending on the level of fear I wake up with any one day, I can switch tribes. And so if I get afraid enough, I need you to remind me, wait a minute. Remember the Come Teach Me tribe? Oh, right. So how do we do this? I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it out, like all of us. But what we're going through now, it feels like it's unclear yet which way all of this is tipping. Certainly fear is prevalent. Discord is prevalent, not just in America, but around the world. But why I say I'm not sure which way it's going is because fear, and when things fall apart, they make a lot of noise. When things come together, they're quieter. That's just kind of spiritual physics. And we live in a global world that is addicted to the noise of things falling apart. Things are always coming together and falling apart at the same time, but we don't hear about the things coming together because the noise of things falling apart is in the foreground. If we are, in fact, moving into a restrictive, darker time, then what we do together matters more than ever. You know, in the Middle Ages in Europe, for 200 years, only 10% of the population was literate. And 10% kept literacy alive for 200 years. And if, in fact, we are going through a constricted time where fear is dominant, then it is incumbent on us that the things we care about, gatherings like this, moments of community, reasserting the Come Teach Me tribe, and reducing our fear matters more than ever because it's incumbent on us to keep the literacy of the heart alive. And so how we are alone and together matters more than ever. So why is it so difficult to accept each other? Who knows? So difficult to care for each other. And every tradition speaks about the paradox and tensions of being human. And you know, this is the thing I've learned through my life is that, you know, somehow when I was young, I was mistaught that wisdom would help me shortcut some of the passages in life. Well, that's not true. Wisdom support everyone in their incarnation has to go through the same thing everybody else did throughout all of time. Wisdom supports us. It doesn't help us skip over anything. So the questions that we are asking now, people have asked for generations. So here's a story that's a creation story that I want to just share. And this is the story of Raven. And it was in Vancouver. I was in Vancouver at the Museum of Anthropology when I entered a rotunda whose seats are scalloped like ripples in a deep lake. And at the center of the ripples, where the stone would have dropped, there's an enormous wood sculpture of a large bird on top of a half-open shell in which humans are waking. And some of the figures are eager to come out, others are hesitant. And the larger-than-life carving, I mean, it's easily almost half the size of this altar. It's on a stone pedestal. And this sculpture was carved out of yellow cedar by a First Nations artist named Bill Reed. With the help of other First Nation carvers, it took him 10 years to carve it. And what this sculpture portrays is a creation story of the Haida people of British Columbia. And it centers on the image of Raven, who is a trickster spirit. And what the story is that when human beings were first being born, Raven was coaxing them, come on out here, it's going to be fine. And I don't know if I want to be out here. Yeah, come on. And then once they were out of the shell, it's too late. They're out. They're born. They're here. And the purpose of the trickster spirit Raven was to say, no, your job is to be here, like it or not. You can't go back in the shell. You can't go back in the shell. And this is a great metaphor, because so much of our fear is that we want to go back in the shell. And the job, I think, of community, from the community of a friendship to a family, to a community, to a town, to a nation, is to support each other being birthed out of our shell, whatever that shell is, and to help each other while we're here. And you can't go back in the shell. Once you're born, you're born. Now, it's interesting that in this museum in British Columbia, in Vancouver, this museum and this sculpture was placed purposely, that before there was a museum, it was a World War II fort in Canada. And it was purposely placed there to have something show that image and that story and place over a place where war had affected it. Not unlike this church, which in 1940 the roof was destroyed by the bombings from the Nazis and has obviously been rebuilt. And not only rebuilt, but look at what we're doing and look at the tradition here. So right here is an image of resilience. We're sitting in an image of resilience. And we don't have to look very far. But like I said, the sound of things falling apart makes a lot more noise. So this isn't going to say a lot. It's going to touch our heart, but it's not going to make a lot of noise. So that says what? We have to help each other hear better, listen more deeply. So, another story in the beginning here, it comes from just, as I started to work on this book, I started to think about, I live in a, not rural, but not urban, kind of an in-between setting. Neighbors are very close. And actually, as I started to work on this book, I realized I don't really know my neighbors that well. Why is that? We wave, shovel in the snow, and he's shoveling across the street, and we wave. But then I started to say, well, what if my power went out? Would he let me in? What if his power went out? Would he let me in? What if my home was bombed? Would he let me stay there for a while? How do we do this? Another great example that's inspiring that you may know about is during World War II is the Kindertransport. Anybody know about the Kindertransport? Yeah. Where thousands of young European Jewish kids were sent by train because many of their parents sensed what was going to happen, and they were sent here to England. Not knowing the language, and people here, just ordinary British families saying, I guess we'll take them in. What else would you do? Not knowing the same language, these kids thinking they'll see their parents again. Most of them didn't. This is inspirational, especially at a time in America right now where children are being separated from their parents. So how do we shift background and foreground? Not deny one, but how do we allow both so that we have some, because this is a lineage too, that we have to remember in counterpoint to these things. And so this brings up, there was a story, Elie Wiesel, in his famous book, Night, his account of being a 15-year-old in Auschwitz. And he talks in there was a moment that stayed with me that was very powerful, there, where he talks about when the Allies were coming, they were all put on a death march in the snow and the ice. And, and the SS officers, anyone who fell would be shot. And in the middle of this, in the middle of the night, an older man stumbled and fell. And everyone around him fell on top of him. And they all could have been shot, but instead they were kind of pistol whipped back on their feet. And so that moment, what made everybody fall on top of this one person? Were they exhausted from all their pain and suffering that they just let their instincts of care take over? There's something about that story that's at the atom of community. That given our true nature, there's Mencius, who was a Chinese philosopher 200 years after Confucius, had a wonderful metaphor about the goodness of human beings. He said it was a water image. He said that water allowed its natural tendency, its true nature, will always flow and join other water. It can be manipulated to go uphill, sideways, but allowed its true nature, water will always flow and join other. And he said, so too human beings. Human beings are innately kind and caring and good, and we can manipulate ourselves or each other to not be kind, but allowed our true nature, we will flow to each other in kindness. We will flow to each other in kindness. Another image in nature that's very helpful in understanding the nature of community is the aspen tree, the aspen grove. I don't know if any of you know about aspens. So aspens and groves are, they can be 200 square acres. But the thing about aspens is they don't have individual root systems. Aspen groves are one of the largest single living organisms on Earth because they have one intertwined root system. Above ground, they are separate trees. Underground, they're one organism. And this is an amazing metaphor for community because we all are individuals. We're not grafted together. But under the visible world, where our individual souls go down into the root system of spirit, we all have one root system. And so in addition to kindness, I have to care if you're not well. Not just because I care that you're not well, but because you could make our entire root system diseased. So how do we work with that awareness when we care for each other? So I raise a lot of questions, and I don't have answers. I'm just trying to figure it out too. But I think we can figure it out, and I think people have figured it out before, and I think we will again. There's an old Sioux saying in the Native American tradition that's very helpful. It says, "The longest journey you will make in your life is from your head to your heart." The longest journey you will make in your life is from your head to your heart. And part of the challenge of the era that we are in is challenging us to make that journey. And for each of us, the individual circumstances that will challenge us are different. And why is that a long journey? Because we're human. And things that matter take time. I love technology. Everything's great, amazing. I can talk to my wife thousands of miles away in a second. But things that matter take time. They always have. They always have. So let me read you part of another passage here from the book. And it's about, I think one of the things that human beings have always struggled with is whole mind thinking versus partial thinking. When we think partially, we're more susceptible to be fearful, and we're more susceptible to sign up for the go-away tribe. When we can hold whole mind thinking, like our roots are connected, we're more readily to be less afraid and to sign up for the come teach me tribe. So one of the things, a great example of this is, some of you know that in the 1800s in America, Henry David Thoreau had a greater consciousness of what was the relationship of things than the people. He was living in Concord, Massachusetts, and he didn't pay his taxes. Now, he wasn't known as a famous author. He was basically, Emerson, who was famous, lived there, and everybody kind of let Henry David do things because Emerson said he's all right. But he's more or less like a very heart-centered, intellectual vagrant. And so he didn't want to pay taxes because America was involved in the Spanish-American War, and he felt his taxes were going toward these violent efforts, and he didn't want to pay for that. So he had whole mind thinking. The people in the town didn't have that. They had partial mind thinking. They said, "You bum, you live here, you're not paying your taxes." They had limited mind thinking, so they threw him in jail. And Emerson came to see him. Maybe some of you know this story. Emerson came to see him, and he said, Henry, what are you doing in there?" And Henry Thoreau looked at him and said, "Oh, Mr. Emerson, the question is, what are you doing out there?" When my wife and I moved to Michigan, I spent most of my time in the East Coast, in the New York area. When we moved to Michigan, in New York there are emission standards, and we have catalytic converters on our cars, which I supported, but they always broke and they were expensive to repair. But we went to Michigan, and I realized when we have car inspections in New York State, got to Michigan, and I realized my inspection was out of date, and I ran to a mechanic, and they said, "Oh, we don't have inspections in Michigan." And I said, "Well, what about this damn catalytic converter? It's broken." He said, "Oh, we don't have that stuff." He said, "The wind blows north to Canada." Whole mind thinking versus partial thinking. Our roots are severed or our roots connected. Crazy. So let me share a story. It's another inspirational story for me about community. This is a story about a monk in the 1600s in Japan. His name was Tetsugen. Now, Tetsugen's calling at a young age was that the works of Buddha were not yet translated into Japanese, and it was his calling. He said, I want to do that. And he had an artist friend. He said, wouldn't it be great if you could carve these beautiful woodblock prints, and we'll do this. So they worked on it, and they started begging alms to get money to publish this beautiful holy text for the first time in Japanese. And about 9 years in, where Tetsugen grew up in the northwest part of Japan, there was a flood, much like Katrina in America or Harvey that was in Houston. And so he gave all the money to help the people where he grew up. And he kept translating, and he went back and started saving, begging again. About 8, 9 years further on, now somewhere else in Japan, there was a famine. He gave the money all away again. He said, damn it. And he gave it all away. I think that was the original Japanese. He said, damn it. And he kept on. And after 25 years, Tetsugen published the first translation of Buddha's talks in Japanese with the beautiful wood prints of his artist friend. And today, in Kyoto, in a museum under glass, is a copy of that original edition. And under it, there is a plaque that reads, in his lifetime, Tetsugen published 3 versions of the holy text. Only one is visible. Only one is visible. Because Tetsugen, he wanted to translate the works of Buddha. He was destined to embody the works of Buddha. So why this is such a powerful story, and why, and these is why I collect stories, because I never knew that. Why wasn't I taught that story in school? I'm 67. Why did I have to wait this long to find this story? I think these stories should be known. And what's powerful about this story, and what's the key, I think, one of the keys between being fearful and being more together than alone, is that Tetsugen opened his heart. His gift came from working with what he was given over working for what he wanted. And if we are going to heal individually and as a people and as a humanity, we have to have the courage and open-heartedness to work with what we're given in a way that's more important than working for what we want. The great philosopher Nietzsche, very atypical quote for him, which I love and has led me to learn more about him. He said later in life, he lived to be 54, but in his early 49, 50, he said, I want to see what is necessary as beautiful so I can be one of those who makes things beautiful. Wow. I want to see what is necessary as beautiful so I can be one of those who makes things beautiful. So it's led me in my life to be open to what I think is a deeper spiritual law, that is, what we work for is often an apprenticeship for our greatness, which is waiting in the challenge to work with what we're given. So there's a small poem of mine that I'll share with you at this point. It has also been a teacher for me, because the things that I write, I retrieve. I don't channel. I bring my whole being to it. I give everything I have. but it's co-creation. I feel like writing is about listening and taking notes. And so therefore I feel like I retrieve the books I've been blessed to bring into the world more than creating them out of nothing. So one of the teachers that has come to me is this small poem that goes, "The mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble." The mystery is that whoever shows up when we dare to give has exactly what we need hidden in their trouble. So one of the questions that we're faced with today, and I want to offer a couple questions from different people, but this is from a Vincent Harding, who's now gone, but he was a civil rights icon in America. But he asked the question, how do we prepare ourselves inwardly to participate in the oneness of humanity? This gets back to Ramana Maharshi and are we carpeting the earth or wearing sandals? How do we prepare ourselves inwardly to participate in the oneness of humanity? So if that question speaks to you, it's incumbent then on you to say, well, what does that mean to me personally in my life in small ways, specific ways? Mother Teresa said, courage is doing small things with love. It's a big thing. How am I going to participate in the oneness of humanity? Well, we start like in our kitchen. Or we start by the wind blows to Canada. That's not good enough. Don't you see the connection? That's a step toward answering that question. Cynthia Cherry, who was the president of Tulane University, she asks, if another world is possible, well, what's my role in making it happen? If another world is possible, what's my role? And she's also asking, what's our relationship to the larger movement of life? It seems overwhelming, but it all starts with small steps that become specific in our lives, because then we go back to the image that every cell that's healthy is one more healthy cell in the immune system of humanity. We don't have to fix it all. We just have to make the cells we're in touch with more healthy. And the global body will get stronger. There's a great metaphor that I use in the book that comes from the desert Christian fathers of the 3rd century, mystic Christian fathers, and it's a beautiful metaphor. So they use the metaphor of a spoked wheel, like a wagon wheel, an old wagon wheel. You can all imagine that. There's a hub, there's spokes and a rim. And what they offered was, they said, every soul on earth is like a spoke on that wagon wheel. When I pursue my life in the world, I discover my uniqueness, because every spoke holds a different spot on the wheel. But when I pursue my inwardness, my soul, my heart to its core, and I go this way, we all meet in the hub. So if I go deep enough into me, I find you. If you go deep enough into you, you find me. And they offered that while each spoke is a soul, our becoming supports, the rim is community. And every individual has a unique spot by pursuing their gifts in the world in holding up that rim. But at the same time, when I go into my center, we all meet in the hub, and that's God, or whatever name you want to give to it. But the powerful thing about this metaphor is, you take any one part out, you don't have a wheel. Take spoke out, doesn't work. You take the rim off, it's not a wheel. Take the hub out, forget it. That's very helpful. 3rd century. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, contemporary psychologist, you may have heard of her work. woman who runs with wolves. Well, she has a wonderful story you may have heard. And it's just a simple story. It's a true story about a man he was the head of a large family, and he was very old, and he was dying, and he was in the hospital, and he gathered all of his family members, his children, his grandchildren, and they were all around, and he pulled out a bunch of sticks. He gave everybody a stick, and he said, break the stick. They all broke the stick. Then he had another batch of sticks, and they were all bound together. He said, break that. And no one could break the bundle. He said, promise me you'll stay together. When I go, promise me you'll stay together, because together we're unbreakable. Yeah, that's powerful. That's helpful. That's beautiful. So, another part in the book is a chapter called Bending or Loving the World. And this really opened me. This is where, I do research differently than someone who's trained in the social sciences, because as a poet, my heart leads research, my metaphors lead research. So I was traveling, as I travel a lot, and I have my passport. And on American passports, which I never noticed, but I was in a long line, so I had nothing to do, so I started reading the passport. I never realized that on every page there's a quote. So on one page, let me find this, I'll give you the quote. So on one page, Lyndon Johnson, mostly presidents were quoted. So Lyndon Johnson said, "This is what America is all about. Is our world gone? Well, we say farewell. Is a new world coming? We welcome it, and we will bend it to the hopes of man." Pretty arrogant. And on the next page, Dwight Eisenhower, who saw the horrors of World War II, who insisted on a Holocaust museum in Washington, D.C., he said, "Whatever America hopes to bring to pass in the world must first come to pass in the heart of America." Oh, that's pretty different. Saying that whatever we want to share with anyone, whatever country, we have to be who we are and love the world. Whereas Johnson was saying, no, we're going to bend things to what we want. And I started to do some research about this, because this was a powerful contradiction. And America is based on this contradiction, because at once America created this place of freedom that would love the world, but it was built on institutional slavery. Doesn't go together. It's never gone together. And this tension, like an atom in a molecule, and we can go further up the chain of being, this tension lives in each person, in each community, in each nation. Are we loving the world or bending the world? And I'm a long-term cancer survivor, and so, life has bent me, thankfully. And I think one of the purposes of suffering, because of what I've gone through and almost dying, I think one of the purposes of suffering is to break us of our will. I think the long journey of experience is an initiation into the holy art of acceptance, which doesn't mean resignation, it means participation in the flow of life. It means in cooperation with all life. So all of these things we're talking about, I'm offering a lot of constellation of things, but they all can be reduced, if anything speaks to you from what I'm offering, they all need to be reduced to where does it live in your life? How can you translate? The only reason things are abstract is if we don't personalize them. So if something moves you, don't try to grasp it. Try to say, where does it live here? How can I take this? What does it mean? Am I bending or loving as I go about my life in the relationships I'm in? Am I bending the world or am I loving the world? Because that's where it starts. Am I supporting, bending, or loving? Am I supporting one root system or every person for themselves? Am I supporting the go away tribe or the come teach me tribe? Am I selling carpet to carpet the earth? Or am I working on wearing sandals? No one like I said in the beginning, we need each other more than ever. No one person can possibly tackle whatever is going on in the entire world. But we can make each soul a healthy soul, so that if there's one more healthy soul, we've got a healthy global body. So I want to talk about our world and what's going on in it, more in America than anywhere else. And this has to do with this plague and epidemic of mass shootings. And so, it's very troubling, to say the least, disturbing. Right? Where I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and 2 years ago we had a shooting 5 minutes from where we live. Just crazy. So what's happening? And what I have come to, and I don't have any answers, but what as far as I've gotten is this sense it's not okay to say those people are crazy and it has nothing to do with us. They may be crazy. They probably are crazy. So at once, those individuals are accountable for the violence they do. But it's not okay to say that we have nothing to do with it. And the way that I've come to hold this is we all know that this is another biological metaphor. We all know that an aneurysm is a weak cell that when the body is pressurized, it can't take the pressure and it explodes, usually leading to a stroke. I think that these shooters are social aneurysms. They're accountable for their actions, but we're accountable for pressurizing the societal body to the point that they're exploding. And so, yeah, they're crazy, and they have to be held accountable, but we can depressurize our society. Now, I don't know what's happening. I mean, I have some ideas, but in America, this is happening more than any other nation on earth. Because, if America was a person, they would have hypertension, they would be off the charts, and so we have this epidemic of social aneurysm, of weak cells exploding everywhere. So we have to have more accountability everywhere, that this is where all things are connected. The root system is connected. I can't understand why someone would shoot so many people, but we can work on all the other things we're talking about. We'll depressurize our society so that the threshold of when they explode will be less. We can do that. So one thing that's very hopeful, as we is in the lineage or the tradition of community, and I want to counter that with, or offer after talking about that, and this is the notion that goes back in time. It's called the commons. The commons. And I want to read some parts about the commons. What do I mean by that? Well, the first definition of commons refers to land that no one owns, but which everyone benefits from, and so therefore has to care for. So the simplest way to understand this is to imagine that you and I live on opposite sides of a lake. Our homes are personal and even private, but the lake which we live on belongs to no one. The lake between us is the commons. And so we have to care for the commons. So Gary Snyder, great American poet and ecologist, really, in a book of his called The Practice of the Wild, he raises the idea of we have to recover the stewardship of the commons. So let's hold on to that for a minute. So other examples of actual physical commons are in the grasslands in Mongolia. For generations, shepherds, they maintain their individual farms or homesteads, but there are acres, miles of vast grazing pastures, which are just too big for anyone to own. But that's where all their cattle graze and live and feed. So they have to take care of the pastures, even though no one owns them. Lobster fishermen in Maine, they put little buoys and they put their little traps down there, but they all have to care for the common waters. So if we extend this metaphor, the air we breathe is a commons. The air we breathe is a commons. Right now we're all breathing. I have air in my lungs, but you're exhaling, I'm inhaling. Well, whose air's in my lungs now? Is it my air? Already, is it your air? It's our air. So let's extend that to the heart. I have my feelings. Well, just like our breathing, your heart has your feelings, you're exhaling them, I'm inhaling. This is what empathy and compassion. If I love you enough and am present enough, your pain is my pain. Compassion is how we take stewardship of the commons known as the heart. And this falls in the courage to love. You know, gathering like this is a commons. So, it's very much the idea, and again with water, that if you live next to me and you live on the other side of me and we have fences between our homes, but we have a stream that runs through all three properties, well, again, it's what you put in that stream is going to come through my property, but we're stewards of the stream. We don't own it. So how do we behave that way? If we take stewardship of what we all need but no one owns. So I want to move into 3 or 4 stories and then a poem to kind of bring us through the rest of this talk that have all been very moving for me to discover. The first one comes from the life of Gandhi, but he's not the central character. And this too was a little known story, which I wonder why I never learned it in school. So in 1924, Gandhi was in his 50s, and this is a story about the struggle of the caste system in India. And as many of you know, in the caste system, there are castes, higher and lower levels, from priests to educated people to people who are laborers. And then there are the untouchables who are not in any caste. And they are so exiled that if someone is touched by an untouchable, then they would throw their clothes out. Untouchables are not allowed to walk down in front of a temple, even if they have to go that way to get to their homes. And this was a huge, you can imagine, I mean, this is like slavery in America. Gone on for thousands of years. And Gandhi felt like, we have enough to deal with at the time with being under colonial rule from England. But he said, this is a Hindu-only matter. Why are we doing this? Well, we go to 1924 in Vaikom, India, which was a province that was not ruled by England, but was actually governed by a Maharaja, a Hindu Maharaja. And there were people who were protesting about the untouchables. And so untouchables and higher class Hindus together one day without fanfare. There wasn't CNN, there was no press. They walked by a temple, in front of the temple, and very quickly they were harshly arrested and beaten and thrown in jail. And no one expected it, but 200,000 people from all of India came to protest. And the Maharaja set up a barricade on the road before the temple. And Gandhi stayed in the background. They asked for his support, and he said, I will support you, but you need to be in the foreground. And so the Hindus who were part of the police, they sat on one side of the barricade with their guns. The protesters sat on the other praying. The height of the moment came and went, and they stayed there for weeks. They stayed there long enough that they forgot which side they were on and who was there for what reason. And nobody moved, nobody budged. Many of the 100,000s had to go back to work and take care of their families, but about 600 stayed. And they took turns, and they did 6-hour shifts of staying here on this barricade. And it got hot, kind of like the last few days. And then when no one was looking, the police on the barricade would sit on their guns, and then they'd give some food to the person opposite them who was rebelling, and they started to talk and trade stories, and why are we here? Well, then the monsoon season came, and floods came, and the Maharaja said, well, that'll be the end of this. They're not going to survive this. And at the height of the floods, the water was chest high. Now the police were in little boats, and there were 400 Hindus, untouchables, and other caste members still keeping their place on the barricade, even in water up to here. And finally, we have a protest and it happens for a day and we think, that's great. After 16 months, the Maharaja sent word to the people who were left on the barricade and said, oh, okay, you can go down this road. And those remaining wouldn't budge. It made them furious, and they said to the Maharaja's men, we're not asking for your permission. We're asking for you to change your mind. This made the Maharaja furious. It went on for another month, 17 months. And finally, the Brahmin came out of the temple and they said, we can no longer resist your prayers. We accept you. And like the two tribes, what barricade are you carrying in you? We got one hand on the gun and one hand on the prayer. Every one of us. Where does that story live in you? In me. That's the lesson. And things that matter take time. Take devotion. 17 months. Wow. Wow. So here's a parable that's been very helpful to me. Could be anybody, but we'll say two monks. Two monks have studied long and hard because one day they're going to journey up a mountain and they have an appointment with Buddha. And finally the day comes and they start up the mountain. And halfway up the mountain, one of them breaks his leg. So they spend the night, and the other one is thinking, well, I'll make sure he's comfortable, but I'm not going to miss my appointment with Buddha. So in the morning, the one who broke his leg, he's not doing well. He has a fever. It's obvious he can't be just left there. So the fable comes to this choice point, and what does he do? What would you do? And what this holds, this parable holds, is that when there are more people in an era that would keep their appointment at the top of the mountain than help their broken other, we have an era of cruelty. When there are more people who discover that taking care of your broken other is the summit, we have an era of compassion. And it doesn't matter what you can make anything on the top of the mountain. Success, financial security, your family, you name it. You can put whatever you want on the top of the mountain. This gets back to, do we work for what we want? Do we give our heart to work with what we're given? I'm not saying we shouldn't want things. I'm saying we shouldn't make gods out of what we want. Because often working toward what we want leads to the unexpected greatness that waits in every heart when we're asked to work with what we're given. So again, the question is, right now in your life, what's your appointment at the top of what mountain? Is there anything that will keep you from keeping it? Why are you so intent on keeping it? We all make a choice every day to contribute to it being an age of cruelty or an age of compassion. Wrestling with that question personally will help the state of the world. Two more stories and then a poem. This story also comes from the East. This is a man named Wu Feng, W-U, last name F-E-N-G. Now, in the 1700s, Wu Feng was a diplomat for China, in the country of China. And he wasn't a good diplomat, he wasn't in favor, so he was like put in an outpost, and he was made the diplomat, or the ambassador, if you will, for what is now Taiwan, which was not very developed. And so at that time, in the 1700s, his job basically, there was an Aboriginal chief and a tribe that basically lived there, and he was there. Well, the first year he was there, it became clear every year this tribe, there was a custom of beheading one member of the tribe as a sacrifice for the community. So Wu Feng, he met with the chief. He said, "You don't have to do this. This is not, it's really not necessary," and pleaded with him. And the chief listened respectfully as long as Wu Feng wanted to talk. He thanked him, and then he went out and he beheaded the chosen tribe member. And the next year, the same thing happened. And this happened year after year. Wu Feng lived there for 25 years. And finally, in the 25th year, he heard himself pleading again, and something in his heart leapt out of him, and he stopped himself and he said, "No, this time, if you kill, it will be me." And the chief, after 25 years, had grown to love Wu Feng. And so he stopped the ritual of beheading. This is a powerful story. Because we all know he could have been beheaded. And this also tells us that we need to give time for love to become the greatest principle. There was no persuasion that was going to change the custom of the tribe. The only thing that changed it was that the chief had grown to love Wu Feng. And whether he was beheaded or not is not really important. It says that at some point in our journey, we have to be what we're talking about. That's a different line for every one of us in every situation, wherever it may be, family, work, our identities, the world. But each of us will face that line, probably more than once. And yeah, if he had done that in the first or second year, the chief probably said, "Oh, your lucky day. Come on. You go ahead." "Yeah, thank you very much, Wu Fang." Again, things that matter take time, and that require not just for us to wait and not do anything, it requires our devotion. And this to me is functional faith. Not faith in an idea or a dogma or a principle, but faith that if we inhabit our lives and open our hearts, this lineage we've been talking about will assert itself and balance the world. And it requires us to stay in it. 17 months in Vaikom, India, 25 years for Wu Fang, 20-some years for Tetsugen. Wow. I tell these stories as much to inspire myself as anyone else. As I said in the beginning, I don't know how to do this, but I believe we can, because I do believe we're more together than alone. So let me share one more story and a poem, and then I'd be happy to have a conversation. So this story, I had a dear, dear mentor and friend. It really touches me to mention him here because he was a child of the Holocaust whose father sent him from Lithuania, he and his sister, here to London, and he never saw his parents again because they died in the camps. And he arrived in this country, Joel Elkes. He now passed a year and a half ago at the age of 102. Joel. And Joel was one of the team here in the 50s in Birmingham. They created Thorazine, and he was one of the fathers of psychopharmacology, as well as an amazing watercolorist and a beautiful human being. And so Joel landed here at 16, and his father was a doctor, and because of his father setting him up here, he entered medical school here at 16, not knowing English. Learning English while he was... But anyway, the story is about his mother who survived Auschwitz, spent the rest of her days in Israel, and like many Holocaust survivors, she never talked about it. And one day, toward the end of her life, as if she'd been talking about it forever, all of a sudden she started talking to Joel, and she said, "You know what made me able to get through every day?" She said 2 things. She said, "Every day I carried a broken piece of bread on me, in case during the day I came across someone more in need than me." And she said, "The only thing I had a broken piece of comb, and every night before I went to sleep, I combed my hair, not for vanity, but so I could affirm my person." I think that's a modern myth. And so I ask you, this is how you can at once do your inner work and also contribute to healing humanity. What is it that you carry every day in case you run into someone more in need than you? It doesn't have to be big. She had a broken piece of bread. And what is it that you do every day to affirm your person? So I invite you to be with these questions, not to answer them, to be in conversation with them, to bring these questions and stories to other people. If a story that I've shared tonight speaks to you, tell it. Don't worry if you tell it the same way. Just tell it, because stories are medicine. Muriel Rukeyser, anybody hear Muriel Rukeyser was a poet, American poet of the last century. One of her poems, she says, say it, the universe is not made up of atoms, but stories. So I very much appreciate the chance to be here and to be with you and your attention, which I can feel, your presence. So let me close this, and then again, I'm happy to have a conversation and meet with you or afterwards. This is a poem from my book of poems, 20 years of my poetry, which I'm very grateful to have, is called The Way Under the Way. This is a poem called Earth Prayer. O endless creator force of life, seat of the unconscious Dharma, Atman, Ra, Kalb, dear center of our love, Christ-light, Yahweh, Allah, Mawu, mother of the universe. Let us, when swimming with the stream, become the stream. Let us, when moving with the music, become the music. Let us, when rocking the wounded, become the suffering. Let us live deep enough till there is only one direction, and slow enough till there is only the beginning of time, and loud enough in our hearts till there is no need to speak. Let us live for the grace beneath all we want. Let us see it in everything and everyone till we admit that when I look deep enough into you, I find me. And when you dare to hear my fear in the recess of your heart, you recognize it as your secret, which you thought no one else knew. Oh, let us embrace that unexpected moment of unity as the atom of God. Let us have the courage to hold each other when we break and worship what unfolds. Oh, nameless spirit that is not done with us, let us love without a net, beyond the fear of death, until the speck of peace we guard so well becomes the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and I'm sure there's many seeds been sown in what Mark's spoken, and the stories carry a lot of pollen as well to pollinate us. So we've got about 10 minutes to do some question and answer, and then Mark will be available to hang out afterwards, sign books, and maybe to chat to as well, and there's each other. There'll be some wonderful people here in the audience you haven't met yet. So just like to invite anyone who would like to ask questions, keep the questions quite succinct so we get a few pollinated around. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much. I saw a quote from you, and pardon me if I got the quote wrong, but it said that you said that there were no wrong turns, only unexplored paths. But you spoke today about a lot of choices we can make between going to the mountains, staying with friend, being the go-away crowd or teach me crowd. And I guess you start talking about politics where you're in a booth making a choice. Can you explain that?
Sure.
Thank you.
So when I talked about, that's from the Book of Awakening, where I offered this notion, that there are no wrong turns, only unexpected paths. So yes, it doesn't mean that in our walk through the world of circumstance, we don't make decisions that are painful or cost. But it means in a larger sense that every choice we make, we learn. Every choice we make, even if they're not good ones, will, if we are honest and authentic, they will lead to transformation. This is one of the things in the Hindu tradition, the whole notion of karma, which is a beautiful sense that's saying, well, something's happened to me, and I can, I was hurt, I've been betrayed, I've been hurt, and if that was supposed to happen to me, then if that person didn't do it, someone else would have, and I can resolve that relationship, but I have to be committed to going where the path is taking me. So what I'm trying to get at there, and teacher Angeles Arian, who's now passed, but she said, experience, being alive isn't being a victim, it's an initiation. And that's kind of what I'm kind of getting at there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just have a question about individual people. We're talking about communities and how everyone comes together, but on a smaller level, when you look at families, neighbours, is there any thoughts or ideas that you have about one person that refuses to connect, that refuses, that is the divider? I think something you said sort of struck home about the fact you can't persuade.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So what do you do with a person who is entrenched and intransient and a divider? Well, I think especially in these times, I've come to feel and yesterday we had a wonderful workshop with wonderful souls. I've come to feel I welcome anyone in the circle except those intent on destroying the circle. I think we have to draw a line somewhere. And I feel that, it's and all I'm, again, what I share is an example, not an instruction. I'm just speaking from my own experience. And so for me, whether it's in families or in friendships or in the workplace, I don't think we can't persuade anyone to anything. People, and I think again, this is the role of experience and suffering. Eventually, people will break open or they won't. And I think what we can do is not try to change someone, but to be more who we are, to set boundaries, and to say, well, I'm not going to be treated like that. And if someone will not listen, then they have forfeited the right to this holy conversation. So rather than, it's the idea that if we've all had experiences with friends or family members, I had a friend who I so wanted him to be a dove, but in truth he was a bear. So I put so much effort in trying to make him a dove, and then after a while, how many times can you put your hand out to feed a dove, and then if it's a bear, well then after a while, it's my perception that's the problem, because you love a bear differently than you love a dove. I can still love a bear, but I don't put my hand out and feed it seed. I throw meat in front of it. So that's a dramatic way, but you understand what I'm saying, that I found it always comes back to being more who we are, being truthful to that, and people will have their own journeys of transformation, and this is where it can be wrong choices, but the path, even the most stubborn people eventually are broken open. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry if you mentioned this already. Do you have any examples of community which is working really well for a good common purpose which exists today?
An example of communities that
work really well, that exist currently today?
I've been talking about communities all throughout history. I think communities like this work well, where we come together, and this has been a lineage forever. There are communities, most of the charities throughout the world which are often created by people who know suffering, are communities that work. I'll give you a great contemporary example of a community that works, because there's a lot of lessons in this, which is in the book. So in the South China Sea, there are entire fishing villages of rafts. They're literally miles long. People have binded their rafts to create a fishing village together. And the reason? Because originally they were individual fishing rafts, but when a typhoon came, they were destroyed. Some of them drowned. And somebody said very simply, hey, if we tie up, I think we'll survive the typhoon. And said, hey, that's a good idea. Now you can Google it and you'll see these beautiful pictures. I wanted to have a picture in one edition of the book. I couldn't get it. But this beautiful picture of these Cambodian fishing villages that are living communities on the sea, hundreds of these individual family rafts bound together, one floating community. That's one example.
We have time for one more question. two, but they've got to be really quick.
It's been wonderful hearing your powerful stories, Mark. One of the stories you shared at the end was the mother who had the comb and the bread, in terms of giving something away and also self-nurture. And I wondered whether you could give an example of something that you've carried in the past or carry to self-nurture or to give away.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things, and this comes from my cancer experience, and I mentioned, I had people from all faiths offer me things to help, and I said I was raised Jewish, but there was a woman who was Catholic who gave me a relic from a saint. It was in a little gold purse, so it was supposedly a piece of a bone from a saint, very precious to her, and she gave it to me, which I kept by my bed for months, and I became very attached to it, and I had it for several years, even after I was well, and then she got ill, and she needed it back. And of course, I gave it to her, but that was it was imperative, and it was hard to let go of it. And also, I believe that it had more healing because I had it and was now returning it. And this is a misunderstanding that's terrible in how white culture versus Native American culture. We've all heard the term Indian giver. And we have misunderstood that to say, you're going to take this back after you've given it. Well, no. The whole notion in the Native American tradition is just what we're talking about. It's that I give something to you when you need it, and then as it heals you, it gains spiritual power, and now when I need it, you give it back, and then I give it to you. What a misunderstanding. That's stewardship of the commons. Nobody owns the healing. See, our Western sense is, I owned this, I gave it, now you want it back. No, the deeper sense is nobody owns that. Whatever heals us, nobody owns. We borrow it. And now when you give it back because it's healed you, it has even more power. And in terms of, everyday affirming, I do two things, very simple things every day. Actually, three things now, that I start my day symbolically. One is, I'm up first, I open the blinds, I let the light in. Every day I consciously let the light in. Second thing is I make coffee for my wife, who's a night person, so she's not up. So I let the light in and I do something for someone I love. And the third is I take care of my dog, who has my heart. Oh, thank you. And
thank you. You made a very interesting point about the mass shootings in the US at the moment, and you likened that to social aneurysm and the pressure build up. Would you be able to say a bit more about what you understand the pressure to be, the hypertension?
Yeah, so the pressure is the side of everything we've been talking about. The pressure is the tension between the way of life. I mean, this is all the spiritual traditions speak about this in different ways. But essentially, and we have more tools and more technology, so we do it more acutely. But essentially, in every society since the beginning of time, there's this misperception on the one hand that we got to get somewhere. Life is there, it's not here. Well, every spiritual tradition affirms that there's nowhere to go. And the more we believe life is over there, now there's a pressure. And now there's, but you may get there before I do. Now there's a competition. What can I do to get there sooner? What can I do to keep that appointment at the top of the mountain? And then every society has different particulars. But one of the real gifts of my life and paradoxes is at this point in my life, I travel all over the world to affirm to everyone that there's nowhere to go. And I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Mark. I feel like we've been fed spiritually tonight, and it feels really lovely to have partaken of this together as well. So, have a big round of applause.
Thank you.